I never really cared that much. And I think if you don't care, then you can take the kind of chances that can consolidate your position.
When Robert Redford was laid to rest, the world watched with heavy hearts. But what truly stunned everyone was a powerful tribute from Paul Newman. Even though Newman had passed many years before, his words and memories filled the room, leaving people speechless. Join us as we uncover the details of this powerful tribute. Robert Redford's eternal farewell. Robert Redford passed away on September 16, 2025, at the age of 89. He passed away in his sleep at his home in Sundance, Utah. It was a peaceful end for a man whose life had touched millions. The family kept the funeral private, true to Redford's wish for simplicity and quiet dignity. Away from the noise of the world, they remembered him with stories, memories, and tributes that spoke of his long journey. Though the gathering was small, the impact spread across the globe. News of Redford's passing brought waves of sadness and admiration from every corner. Jane Fonda, who had worked with him often, shared her grief and described the depth of his presence in her life. Meryl Streep called him a lion, a symbol of strength and grace. Barbra Streisand reflected on his brilliance and how unforgettable he was. Dustin Hoffman spoke of the joy of working beside him, while journalist Bob Woodward, immortalized in one of Redford's greatest films, remembered him as a man of principle and lasting friendship. Beyond Hollywood, tributes came from leaders and public figures. Barack Obama remembered his spirit. Hillary Clinton and Al Gore spoke of his influence not only in film, but also in the causes he championed. From directors like Martin Scorsese and Ron Howard to actors like Morgan Freeman, Leonardo DiCaprio, Scarlett Johansson, Julianne Moore, and Edward Norton, voices poured out in a chorus of respect. Each word painted a picture of a man who was more than an actor, more than a filmmaker, more than a star. He was a force who used his life to tell stories and inspire others. The funeral was not a grand spectacle. It was held with care and humility. Redford was to be interred on his Sundance property, the land he had poured his heart into. It was a fitting place, surrounded by nature, mountains, and the vision he had built into a community for artists. In that setting, the memories of his life felt rooted and unshakable. The reading of Newman's words, decades after his passing, was the most touching moment. Their friendship had shaped both of them, beginning when Newman supported Redford's casting in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Over the years, their bond grew through laughter, rivalry, and respect. When Newman passed away in 2008, Redford had spoken of losing a real friend, someone whose place could never be filled. Now, at Redford's farewell, it was Newman's turn to echo back across time, a reminder of a connection that even death could not erase. As the service ended, those who were there left with hearts heavy but also full. Outside of the private gathering, the world continued to share stories, to replay scenes from his films, and to write about the man who had left behind such a powerful legacy. His farewell was quiet, but its meaning was vast. But what kind of connection existed between Robert Redford and Paul Newman? The timeless bond of Robert Redford and Paul Newman. When the idea for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid began to take shape in the late 1960s, Paul Newman was already one of the most respected actors of his time. He was chosen to play the role of Butch Cassidy, a witty outlaw with charm and confidence. The search for the right actor to play Sundance, his quiet and sharp partner, was far more complicated. Studio executives wanted a big name, someone already well established, but Newman and his wife, Joanne Woodward, thought differently. Woodward had seen something in Robert Redford, a young actor still finding his way but already carrying a rare presence on screen. She suggested him for the role. The studio was not convinced at first. Redford was talented but not yet a proven star who could carry a major film. Still, Newman believed that the chemistry between them would be perfect. He pushed for Redford, going against the doubts of others. This decision was the beginning of something far greater than a casting choice. It marked the start of a friendship that would grow stronger over decades. When Redford was finally chosen, the two men met not as rivals but as equals, ready to bring their characters to life. Their connection was immediate, both on screen and behind the camera. From that moment, their names would be linked in one of the greatest partnerships in Hollywood history. Their first film together, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, released in 1969, became a classic almost instantly. Audiences were drawn to the playful banter, the quick wit, and the balance between Newman's charismatic Butch and Redford's calm, watchful Sundance. Newman's established stardom made him the natural lead, but Redford's quiet intensity gave the film its heart. Viewers could not take their eyes off either of them, and together they created magic that would define an era. The film was not only a box office success, but also a cultural landmark, setting the tone for buddy films for decades to come. 4 years later, they joined forces again in The Sting, a story about two clever con men navigating a world of tricks and danger. By then, Redford had risen to major stardom, and his name alone carried weight. Newman remained the seasoned veteran, confident and magnetic. The pairing once again worked perfectly, with Newman's lively energy complementing Redford's calm style. Their teamwork in The Sting was so seamless that it won the Academy Award for Best Picture, further proving that when these two were together, the screen lit up in ways few had ever seen. Their on-screen chemistry was unlike anything else of that time. It was not forced, nor was it carefully constructed. It flowed naturally, a result of their genuine bond. They trusted each other, listened to each other, and allowed space for one another to shine. Newman brought years of experience and a playful sense of confidence, while Redford carried youthful charm and thoughtful silence. Together they created characters who felt real, alive, and deeply connected. Their partnership shaped how audiences saw friendship, loyalty, and mischief. Every smile, every glance, and every shared moment on screen carried weight because the truth of their bond was reflected in their performances. Off-screen, their friendship was just as strong as what the world admired in theaters. They lived near each other at different times and shared many of the same values. Both cared deeply for their families and worked to protect their private lives from the constant gaze of fame. They loved the craft of acting, but never let the glitter of Hollywood take away their sense of self. Instead, they leaned on each other, finding comfort in a friendship that was steady and real. Their bond was filled with laughter. Both men had a sharp sense of humor, and they enjoyed teasing one another with practical jokes. Sometimes it was a playful prank on set, other times a light-hearted jab in interviews. It was never cruel, but always filled with warmth, a way of showing affection without needing to say much. Those who worked with them often recalled how their energy together created a joyful atmosphere. Beyond humor, there was trust and support. Redford admired Newman's devotion to his wife and children, while Newman respected Redford's quiet strength and independence. They encouraged each other in their careers, but also in their personal lives. Newman's charitable work, from racing to building his foundation, inspired Redford, who poured his energy into creating the Sundance Institute and championing independent film. Their values reflected one another, shaped by respect for art, nature, and the people around them. They were not men who needed to speak constantly about their friendship. Instead, they showed it through action, through loyalty, and through the calm assurance that they could always rely on one another. In a world where fame often leads to rivalry or jealousy, theirs was a bond that only grew stronger over time. It was simple, honest, and unbreakable. Together, they gave the world not only two unforgettable films, but also an example of true friendship. Their connection began with a casting choice, grew through iconic performances, and flourished in the quiet moments away from cameras. For Robert Redford and Paul Newman, it was never about who shined brighter. It was about trust, respect, and the joy of sharing life's journey side by side. And though the years would eventually take them down different paths, the bond they formed never faded. It remained one of the most remarkable friendships in the history of film, written forever in the hearts of those who watched them together. However, their friendship did not stop there. They went on to share even more about each other, and their words left the world deeply moved. Redford and Newman's words of friendship. Paul Newman and Robert Redford were not just actors who worked together. They were men who found in each other a rhythm that lasted for life. Their bond was written not only in films, but also in the words they left behind. When Newman spoke about Redford, he did not focus on fame or success. He spoke about what it meant to share work, laughter, and the simple joy of having someone to lean on. Newman often said their partnership worked because they balanced each other in a way that felt natural. He knew that Redford brought a quiet energy, a steady calm that played against his sharper edges, That harmony turned into magic on the screen, and Newman never shied away from admitting how much it mattered. He gave credit where it was due. It was Joanne Woodward, his wife, who first saw something in Redford that the studios had missed. Newman himself later explained how thankful he was that she had urged them to bring the younger actor into Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He recognized that decision as the spark that lit their long journey together. In interviews, Newman described how fun it was to trade lines and glances with Redford because it always felt alive, never forced. He noted how they could switch between joking around and working seriously without losing balance. He respected Redford's commitment to the craft, his insistence on being truthful in every role, and his ability to disappear into character without needing attention for himself. Newman's words showed warmth, pride, and affection. More than colleagues, they were companions who trusted one another. When Paul Newman passed away in 2008, the silence that followed was heavy. For Robert Redford, it was not just the passing of a star, it was the loss of a presence that had shaped his life in ways that few others had. Redford said then that he had lost a true friend. He spoke carefully because he believed that some feelings could never be captured fully in words. Yet even in his restraint, it was clear that he carried deep gratitude for the years they had shared. He called their relationship one that went beyond the ordinary, built on respect, admiration, and a rare kind of loyalty. Redford remembered Newman as someone who combined talent with generosity. He admired how Newman carried himself, how he cared for his family, and how he gave back through his many charitable works. For Redford, it was never just about the films. It was about the character of the man who stood beside him. He once explained that their connection was rooted in trust, something not always easy to find in Hollywood. Redford acknowledged Newman's humor, his mischief, and his strong will, but above all, he cherished his kindness and the honesty he brought into every part of life. When Redford shared his thoughts, there was no drama, no attempt to make it larger than it was. Instead, there was quiet respect. He said that Newman's death left a space that could never be filled. To Redford, Newman had been more than a partner on screen, more than a co-star in two of cinema's greatest films. He had been a constant, a reminder that friendship could endure fame, distance, and time itself. Redford's words painted a picture of two men who found something rare and held on to it until the very end. Their voices, captured in different moments, form a mirror of affection. Newman saw in Redford a younger counterpart who made the work joyful and alive. Redford saw in Newman a mentor and a true companion whose presence lifted everything he touched. In speaking about each other, they left the world a lesson in loyalty and care. Their friendship, carried through their words, showed that even in the glare of Hollywood lights, it is the human bond that shines brightest. Even down to their tributes, both men spoke in a way that left the world stunned. Newman and Redford's final tributes. Paul Newman left the world on September 26, 2008, at the age of 83. His passing marked the end of an era, and though the world mourned him deeply, the actual farewell was quiet and private. His family chose a cremation and a service away from the public eye. There were no cameras, no long speeches broadcast to the world. This choice reflected the way Newman had lived, grounded, modest, and centered on family. Robert Redford, his closest friend and collaborator, was not recorded delivering a eulogy at the burial. What exists instead are Redford's heartfelt words shared through interviews in the days that followed. He spoke of loss in a way that revealed how much Newman had meant to him, admitting that his grief reached beyond language. These remarks, carried by the press, became the lasting record of Redford's voice at Newman's farewell. While no written text or graveside tribute from Redford is in the public record, his reflections offered the clearest glimpse into the love and respect he carried for a man who had been his partner both on and off screen. The impact of Newman's voice on Redford's life extended far beyond their films. When Newman publicly embraced Redford early in his career, it helped the younger actor earn trust in a competitive industry. Newman's willingness to support him during the casting of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid did more than secure him a role. It introduced him to the world as a star, worthy of attention. That confidence, coming from someone of Newman's stature, gave Redford a foundation to build upon. Over the years, Newman continued to speak warmly of their work together, and that steady affirmation helped shape Redford's image as more than just a performer. He came to be seen as a thoughtful craftsman, a reliable partner, and someone who valued depth over flash. As Redford grew older, the lessons he had absorbed from Newman seemed to echo in his choices. He created the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival, nurturing young filmmakers in the same way Newman had once nurtured him. He became a mentor in his right, offering opportunities for new voices to find their place. This role mirrored the generosity Newman had shown and reinforced the link between them in the public mind. To many, Redford's Sundance persona carried the same authenticity and commitment that Newman had long embodied. Their names, spoken together, suggested not just two actors, but two ideals: loyalty, integrity, and belief in the power of storytelling. Newman's influence was inseparable from Redford's reputation, and Redford's later work often felt like a living tribute to the friend who had once believed in him when it mattered most. When Robert Redford passed away on September 16, 2025, the world once again turned to the bond between these two men. Newman had been gone for nearly 2 decades, yet his presence was felt in the tributes that filled Redford's private funeral. Reports made clear that Newman could not be there in person, but his memory was carefully woven into the service. Instead of a live speech, what was shared were Newman's words from the past, statements he had made about their friendship, their work, and the joy they had found in each other's company. Whether read aloud by a family member or remembered through a recorded piece, those words stood as a reminder of a partnership that had shaped both their lives. The choice to include Newman's voice was striking in its simplicity. It was not about recreating the past, but about acknowledging that Redford's journey could not be fully told without Newman. The tribute became the most powerful moment of the farewell. Those present heard Newman's reflections not as distant history, but as living testimony, still carrying warmth and humor even years after his passing. It was as if the two friends were once again side by side, one speaking and the other listening, the way they had done countless times before. For those outside the gathering, reports of this tribute resonated deeply. Audiences remembered the laughter and camaraderie they had shared on screen, and hearing Newman's voice brought that feeling back. It reminded people that while both men were icons in their right, together they had created something unique. Their friendship had become as much a part of their legacy as any film or award. The mountains of Sundance held Redford's final rest, but the sound of Newman's words gave the service its heart. The world may have lost them years apart, but in that quiet moment, they seemed bound together again. It was a farewell shaped not only by Redford's achievements, but also by the enduring echo of his closest friend. However, it was not just one voice that honored Redford at his funeral. Many others stepped forward to share their memories. Tributes that defined Redford's legacy. The most tender moments at Robert Redford's funeral came not from cameras or grand ceremonies, but from the people who knew him best. His wife, Sibylle, and his daughters anchored the intimacy of the gathering. They spoke about the quiet father and husband behind the icon, the man who loved mornings in the Utah mountains, and the man who always insisted on keeping family at the center of his life. Their words painted a picture of Redford that few outside his circle had seen, and it gave the service a softness that balanced the gravity of the occasion. Hollywood peers added layers of memory and admiration. Jane Fonda shared reflections of their collaborations, remembering how Redford had a way of combining depth with a twinkle of charm. Meryl Streep spoke of him as a figure of strength, someone who carried artistry with grace and discipline. Dustin Hoffman recalled their time on screen together, describing the ease of working with him as if it was less work and more joy. Each tribute carried themes that overlapped: Redford's artistry, his mentorship of younger actors, and his tireless commitment to causes beyond the screen. These words were echoed by filmmakers and peers who could not attend but sent messages. They highlighted his role as a mentor and a quiet activist, someone who had built spaces for artists through Sundance and who had lent his voice to protecting the environment. The tributes emphasized not just his career, but the breadth of his life's work. There were also symbolic gestures woven into the service. A soft musical piece was played that reflected his love for nature, and there were cinematic callbacks to his career. Short clips projected moments from films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting, not as grand showcases, but as reminders of the laughter and spirit he brought to audiences. These glimpses of his work, set against the solemnity of the moment, created a bridge between the Redford the world adored and the Redford his family mourned. The service was less about celebrity and more about memory, built through words, music, and images that spoke directly to who he was. Outside of Sundance, the reaction was vast and swift. Media outlets captured his passing with headlines that underscored the many sides of his identity. He was remembered not only as an actor, but as the founder of Sundance, an environmentalist, and a cultural figure whose influence reached far beyond film. Articles in the Associated Press, The Guardian, and People celebrated his artistry while also pointing to his activism and leadership. The coverage framed him as an icon who had balanced fame with responsibility, someone who had shaped both art and society. On social media, the tributes took on a life of their own. Hashtags tied to his name and to Sundance trended across platforms, with fans and celebrities sharing memories of their favorite films. Clips of his on-screen moments circulated widely, alongside photos of him in nature and at Sundance events. A particularly moving moment that spread quickly was the Newman Remembrance, where his words were shared at the service. For many, it was the detail that turned Redford's farewell into something timeless, bringing back the image of their friendship. Essays and opinion pieces framed this as a cultural touchstone, noting how rare such genuine connections are in Hollywood and how their bond had come to symbolize trust and loyalty. The immediate impact of Redford's death was a surge of retrospectives. Film critics and cultural commentators revisited his classic roles, his directing, and his decades of advocacy. Documentaries were replayed, essays republished, and panels convened to discuss his lasting importance. Sundance itself became a focus point, with reflections on how his festival had given voice to generations of filmmakers. The funeral, with its intimate tributes and the echo of Newman's memory, was described as the perfect mirror of Redford's values, understated, meaningful, and rooted in authenticity. In the long term, the story of his passing will be folded into the broader narrative of his life. Biographies will revisit not just his work, but also the way his friendship with Paul Newman shaped how the world saw him. Future retrospectives will almost certainly return to the image of two young men in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and then move forward to the lasting memory of their bond, reinforced by the tributes at Redford's farewell. Scholars of film history will underline how Newman's early support gave Redford his start, and how Redford carried that spirit forward through Sundance and beyond. The buddy film legend narrative will remain central, showing how their personal connection influenced not only their lives, but also the way audiences understood male friendship on screen. Robert Redford's funeral became more than a moment of mourning. It was a cultural bookmark, a place where memory, art, and friendship converged. In the silence of the mountains, in the words of his family, in the tributes of peers, and in the echo of Newman's voice, the world was reminded that his legacy was not just about stardom. It was about the bonds he built, the stories he shaped, and the light he left behind. The secret legacy of Redford and Newman. When a figure as beloved as Robert Redford leaves the world, the news rarely arrives without noise. In the days following his passing, while tributes poured in from friends, colleagues, and world leaders, a parallel wave of chatter emerged across social media. This was not unfamiliar ground. In 2015, long before his actual passing, false reports of Redford's death had circulated widely online. His representatives quickly stepped in at the time, clarifying through outlets like Reuters and ABC that he was alive and well. That earlier hoax created a precedent, showing how easily rumors could blur with reality when a celebrity of his stature was involved. So when his family confirmed his death in 2025, skepticism naturally followed in some corners of the internet. Social platforms filled with speculation, with some users questioning the timing, while others spun stories that had no basis in fact. Established media outlets swiftly addressed the confusion, repeating the verified details of his death, that he passed peacefully in his sleep at his Sundance home on September 16th at the age of 89. By presenting confirmed information and dismissing unfounded claims, These outlets made clear that the rumors were nothing more than noise in the wake of loss. The moment highlighted a pattern common with high-profile deaths, where fantasy sometimes tries to drown fact, yet in the end, truth stands firm. Even before his death, Redford had faced moments of public scrutiny. One of the more notable controversies came in the early 2000s when Sundance Productions became the subject of a legal dispute. The matter, which unfolded between 2003 and 2005, was eventually settled, but it offered a reminder that even admired figures must sometimes face challenges tied to the business side of their careers. Beyond that, Redford was occasionally criticized for his political views or public stances, particularly when he spoke out on environmental issues or government policies. These criticisms never tarnished his reputation in a lasting way. They reflected the risks that come with being a public voice unafraid to speak honestly. Added to this were the earlier celebrity death hoaxes, which, though not scandals in the traditional sense, became part of the narrative surrounding him. Taken together, these controversies and rumors formed a backdrop against which the public measured his final years. Importantly, when the true news of his passing emerged in 2025, there were no scandals or criminal matters attached to his name. His death was seen as natural, peaceful, and free of any shadow beyond the grief it caused. That clarity allowed people to focus on his life, his work, and his legacy rather than distractions. The greatest irony of Redford's farewell was how it circled back to the very beginning of his greatest friendship. Paul Newman had left the world in 2008, but his voice returned at Redford's funeral, reminding all who listened of the partnership that defined them both. Decades earlier, they had stood together under the lights of a Western set, shaping characters who would live in cinema forever. Now, in a quiet chapel near the Sundance Mountains, it was Newman's words that carried Redford home. The power of that moment was not in spectacle, but in symmetry. Two men who had laughed, worked, and grown old together were reunited, not in life, but in the memory they left behind. The stunning quality of the tribute came not from surprise, but from the depth of emotion it stirred. Listeners understood that the bond between Redford and Newman had been genuine, built on respect and loyalty that endured beyond death. As Redford once said of Newman in 2008, reported by ABC, "I have lost a real friend." And as Newman had said of their partnership in earlier years, "We bounce off each other." These words, set side by side, became the lasting coda of their story. What began with two actors on screen ended with two voices in memory, echoing through the hills Redford loved and into the hearts of those who mourned him. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.